Hello, everyone. Welcome to Medicine and Miracles. I'm your host, Dr. Scott McMahon. I've been a board certified pediatrician for over 30 years. I've specialized in the diagnosis and treatment of CIRS for nearly 15 years. CIRS is short for Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome, and it's pronounced CIRS. It's a mystery illness to many doctors, and it can affect any part of your body. Now, I've evaluated over 2,000 patients for CIRS. I've published 10 articles, co-written a CIRS medical textbook, given 50 presentations at medical meetings, and testified as an expert in 10 states and in 2 other countries. But I'm also a man of faith, and I've followed Jesus for over 30 years. I'm an ordained minister. I've pastored a church. I've written a book on spiritual warfare. And I've been on 15 international mission trips, which some of which I preached and some of which I did medical work and in some of which I did both. So this is Medicine and Miracles. Today we're going to talk about medicine and science, but we're also going to talk about faith and some miracles that I have seen over the years. And some people think that those subjects are incompatible with each other. I'm going to show you that that's not true. Medicine, miracles, medicine and miracles. It's going to be great. So let's dive in. Now, today we're going to look at dysregulation as it applies to disease in general, but also as it applies to CIRS in particular. Now, we started a series in episodes 3 and 4 looking specifically at CIRS, and this is a continuation of that. The episode number 4 was specifically about regulation and discussing what regulation does in your body and why it's so important. Today, we're going to talk about dysregulation and how it can cause disease and even death. So you may want to go back and check out episode number 4. Regulation is what keeps you alive. It creates harmony in your body, and it keeps your organs, your tissues, your cells, and even the processes inside your cells working smoothly. Regulation is precision management of your body, and that's what keeps you alive and healthy. Now, dysregulation is the opposite of that. When you have dysregulation, something's not working right. Persisting dysregulation will lead to disease, to loss of function, and even to death. So let me give you a few examples of dysregulation, just looking at chemicals that are in your blood. If your potassium level is too high in your blood, it will affect the rhythm of your heart beating, and it will cause your heart to stop beating, and then you die. But if the potassium level is too low, it will affect the rhythm of your heart beating in a different way, and it'll cause your heart to stop beating, and you'll die. Now, the normal range of potassium in our blood is 3.5 to 5 milliequivalents per liter. You don't have to worry about milliequivalents per liter. Just remember 3.5 to 5. That's a really narrow range. And if the level gets as high as 7 or as low as 2.5, it can be life-threatening. If it's much higher than 7, you'll probably die. You definitely will die without intervention. And if it gets much lower than 2.5, you'll probably die. Definitely will die if without intervention. So dysregulation of just that one chemical, high or low, can lead to disease and even death. Now let's talk about another chemical, your calcium level. If it's too high, it'll also affect the rhythm of your heart in a completely different way. And that will lead eventually to your heart stopping beating, and then you die. But alternatively, if your calcium level is too low, it will cause your heart to stop beating for yet a different reason. And then you die. So another chemical, just a very narrow range of normal. Let's talk about one that causes disease. Sodium. If your sodium level, that's like salt, sodium chloride. If your sodium level in your blood is too high, it'll cause you to become dehydrated. And you could get high blood pressure, you could get kidney disease, you could have vomiting, confusion, and you could even have seizures. But if your sodium level is too low, then it will cause you to become dehydrated. Again, you could have psychosis where you're not in touch with reality, or maybe just bipolar disease. You can have headaches, you can get drowsy, and you can also have seizures. So different systems of regulation keep these chemicals at very tight levels so that illness and disease of dysregulation don't occur. And there are many, many other chemicals, hundreds of other chemicals and proteins and enzymes and whatnot that are in your body that if they get out of whack, then your regulation will become dysregulation that lead to symptoms, to disease, and even death. Now, let's look specifically at some of the chemicals and processes that are important to CIRS. Cortisol is one of the chemicals we look at. If your cortisol level in your blood is too high, it can also cause you to become psychotic. That's not good. And if your cortisol level stays high, it can give you all sorts of weird fat distributions around your body. You get belly fat, you get a big hump on the back of your neck, and other things if it's chronically elevated. Now, if your cortisol level is too low, it can cause chronic fatigue, low blood pressure, abdominal pains, poor healing throughout your body, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, and even hair loss. So you can see how important regulation is. Let's talk about another chemical. This one is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. If that level is too high, it can cause you to urinate very infrequently. Normal is 3 to 4 times a day. You might only go once or twice a day. You might not go at all. Urinate. That's a bad thing because you get waterlogged and your sodium level will drop. And we already knew if your sodium level drop, you can have seizure. Alternatively, if your antidiuretic hormone is too low, this can cause you to urinate way too much, even 25 or 30 times a day. Cause you to get dehydrated, can develop constant thirst, dry lips, dry tongue, feel fatigued, and get severe headaches. So again, regulation and keeping that antidiuretic hormone just right is really crucial for your body to work properly. Now we're going to talk about something that's not a chemical. It's called perfusion. Perfusion is a fancy term. What it means is that the blood comes from your lungs with oxygen to your heart, and then your heart squeezes, and the blood comes out of the left ventricle into your aorta, that big, huge artery in your body, and it then goes to your whole body from there. And the purpose of that is to take the oxygen to the individual cells and also to pick up the waste products from your cells, as well as bring heat from the core of the body to your fingers and toes and things like that. If you have low perfusion, or what we call hypoperfusion, which occurs in CIRS patients all the time, you have hypoperfusion, then your small blood vessels. Remember we said the aorta is about this big. By the time it gets to your cells, they're microscopic. So they're itsy bitsy small. It keeps those blood cells from getting adequate oxygen to it keeps the blood from getting adequate oxygen to the red blood cells. From the red blood cells to your cells. And the cells use that oxygen to make energy so they can perform whatever kind of functions that particular cell is supposed to do. So if you have hypoperfusion, you also get insufficient glucose, fancy name for sugar from the foods you eat and whatnot, which go into the cells, and your cells use those to make energy. So if you're not getting adequate oxygen or you're not getting adequate sugar to your cells, they don't make energy and they underperform whatever task they're supposed to do. Now, some of the symptoms of hypoperfusion depend on what kind of cell or what kind of tissue you're trying to perfuse. So if it's your hands and feet are not getting sufficient oxygen and sugar, then what can happen is they can become cold. You can get cramps. You can get discoloration. I've seen lots of teenage girls with like blue or greenish purple hands or feet, and when we treated them for CIRS, it got all better. But let's say it's your brain that's not getting adequate blood flow. And that's been documented in CIRS patients, that there are areas of your brain you're not getting adequate blood flow or perfusion. What happens then when you're not getting that oxygen is you can have a decrease in your memory. You can have decreasing your attention span. You could lose words or even your train of thought when you're talking. It can be hard for you to concentrate, hard for you to learn new stuff, and you can even get disoriented. We've talked about disorientation before, not in this podcast, but someone who's oriented will know their name, they'll know where they are, and they'll know what day of the week it is. What we find with people who have CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, is sometimes the damage to their brain is so sufficient that they don't remember where they're at or what day of the week it is. So they are disoriented. And that's a bad sign, to be honest with you. You don't want to be disoriented. Now, let's say that this is affecting your eyes. Okay? If you're not getting adequate amount of blood flow to the back of your eye, to the retina, then you can fail what's called a visual contrast sensitivity test, which is one of the screening tests that we use for CIRS. And we expect that you're going to fail this before you're treated. We're going to talk about VCS on another podcast in great detail. Now, let's say it's your lungs that are not getting adequate blood flow. Well, then you'll get shortness of breath, and you'll probably have chronic fatigue too, because the normal functioning of the heart and lungs is affected by the fact that you're not getting adequate blood flow. And then finally, let's say that you're having decreased blood flow, like your hands and your arms and your feet and your legs and whatnot. It's kind of diffuse. Well, when that happens, you're going to have chronic fatigue because chronically, globally, you are not making adequate amounts of energy in your cells. Now, there are other things that can be abnormal if you have chronic inflammatory response syndrome. One of those is that you could have abnormal tight junction. What is a tight junction? Well, to understand that, first you have to know what a junction is. Anywhere in your body where your cells touch another cell, and there are 30 trillion cells, anywhere where they touch, where the membrane of one touches the membrane of other, that's going to be called a junction. And those junctions are loose or they're tight. If they're loose, it means that small amounts of fluid and proteins and whatnot can pass right between where those junctions are. But if they're tight, then that means something else has happened and they're like a Ziploc bag and there's no fluid and there's no proteins going through there. So loose and tight junction. Now, most of the body has loose junction, but there's two places where you have tight junction. One is the arteries that are going to feed the brain, because the brain just doesn't want the same junk going into it as what happens elsewhere. So by 5 days of life, 5 days of life in a brand new baby born, cells from the brain intercalate themselves into cells of the blood vessels to create what's called the blood-brain barrier, or a tight junction of the arteries feeding the brain. In the gut, you have also tight junctions, and the top layer of those tight junctions is patrolled by MSH, or alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, whereas the blood-brain barrier is controlled by VIP, or vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. They keep things intact. The problem is that almost all of our patients are low in VIP or MSH or both. In fact, every one of my patients will be low in either VIP or MSH and about 2/3 in both. And so you're not patrolling the blood-brain barrier as well as you should be. You're not patrolling the gut and its tight junctions as well as you should be. And that leads to dysregulation. On top of that, if you have CIRS, you have extra cytokines like TGF-beta1, MMP9, C4A, and those cytokines will disrupt the blood-brain barrier and also the gut. And so you start having problems. Now, in the brain, what does that look like? Well, same symptoms we talked about with hypoperfusion. Decreased memory, decreased attention and concentration, increased confusion, increased losing words or your train of thought. It's difficult to learn new stuff, and you can get disoriented. In the gut, this is what we call a leaky gut, because your tight junctions have become leaky and stuff can now squirt through that couldn't squirt through before. It's like opening your Ziploc bag up just a little bit and then turning it over, and guess what? Stuff falls out. Well, in this case, the stuff is digested food particles, and they go into places where immunologically they were never intended to go. And from that, you can get bloating, gassiness, abdominal pains, diarrhea, What else? You can also get food sensitivities. You can get food allergies. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are reversible if you are treated for them. So do you have gluten sensitivity? It may be because your MSH is low, and it also may be because you have CIRS. Now, we're going to move from there to the hypothalamus. And remember, we're talking about dysregulation. The hypothalamus is the main organ of regulation in your entire body. It's got its little fingers in every system of your body. And based on hormones and nerves and whatnot, it touches almost every cell of the body directly. So it is huge if this becomes inflamed, and it does, because the leaky blood-brain barrier, remember we talked about, the VIP is low, and so you get a leaky barrier, and now stuff can ooze into your brain and cause inflammation in your brain, but it can also cause inflammation in your hypothalamus. And that causes this low-level inflammation that we call encephalitis. Now, when the hypothalamus becomes inflamed, it can mess up in 3 different main huge areas. One of those is the endocrine system or hormone system. One of those is your basic thermostats of your body, or what I call set points. And then the third one is the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to talk briefly about each one of those, but know that I'm going to do another podcast just talking about the hypothalamus, and maybe even breaking each one of these systems up into a different podcast, because it's really deep, it's really profound, and I really want you to understand this, particularly if you have CIRS. Now, the endocrine effect. The hypothalamus controls the pituitary. The pituitary is called the master gland. It is the master hormone controller of the body, and it gets its orders from the hypothalamus. Between these 2 organs, they're like right on top of each other. Between these 2 organs alone, there are the production and release of 9 different hormones. Now, we've all heard the word hormone, but let's kind of define that for a second. A hormone is a regulatory chemical that comes from a location and affects a distant location. So antidiuretic hormone made in the hypothalamus/pituitary, stored for sure in the pituitary, when it's released, it affects the kidneys and how much you pee. So there's a distance between them. It's a way that the brain can control what's going on, regulate in the rest of your body. And so it's kind of important. 9 different hormones, right, made in the brain, but affecting your thyroid, your adrenal glands, your ovaries, your testicles. It probably don't have both, but men with one and women with the other. Your overall growth rate, your blood sugar, your mood. If you're a pregnant woman, the development of milk and lactation. If you're a pregnant woman, it's time to deliver. It's one of these hormones causes your uterus to start contracting so that you can have the baby. So you can see there are a lot of different things that are going on here. And I forgot, women's periods are all related to these hormones also. Abnormalities in any of these symptoms can occur when you have CIRS. And like I said, another time I'm going to devote an entire podcast just to the hypothalamus. It's just too much to do in this one. And I also mentioned that the hypothalamus controls these global set points or thermostats, like your sleep cycle, like how hot or cold you feel, as well as what your actual body temperature is, and also your appetite and how you metabolize your food. These are all affected by the hypothalamus. And finally, and by the way, when I say the word affect or affected by, I'm saying regulated by, because this is about dysregulation, isn't it? Last but not least, the autonomic nervous system breaks into 2 parts. One is called sympathetic, one is called parasympathetic. The autonomic nervous system sends nerves to every cell in your body that's alive. So like hair cells, maybe not so much. To the base of the hair cells, yes. But to the hair cell that's actually sticking out, not so much. To the muscles that control the hair cell, yes. But not to the dead cell or not to your dead nails. It is amazing how much impact this has on your body. So for instance, when your heart beats and the strength with which your heart beats are both dictated by this autonomic nervous system. The frequency with which you breathe and the depth with which you breathe is affected by the autonomic nervous system. And if you didn't get it already, the hypothalamus controls the autonomic nervous system, both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and it determines what the tone is that's going to go out. So it's helping determine what your heart rate is going to be, what your respiratory rate is going to be, etc. Not only that, but when the heart does beat and the blood goes out in the aorta, is it going to go primarily to the muscles in your arms and legs? Or is it going to go primarily into the core of your body, to the gut, and other things that are central to your body? The hypothalamus and the tone on these two systems is what determines that. It determines whether you're in fight or flight mode. It affects the blood pressure. It affects how big or small your pupil is, whether the hairs on your skin raise up or not. It's involved in sexual stimulation, digestion, excretion of waste products, etc., etc., etc. It affects so many aspects of you, and you are totally unconscious that it's doing it. And as you might expect, dysregulation of the organ we call the hypothalamus causes dysregulation throughout your body and utter, total chaos. And that's what we see in CIRS patients. So if you feel like you're just sick from stem to stern, that gives you one reason to understand. Now, there's a lot more videos about CIRS and about these systems that we're talking about and whatnot that are free at www.cirsx.com. And you can find a list of trained treating professionals at www.survivingmold.com. So check them out. Now, I also want to tell you that our next Surviving Mold CIRS-X jointly co-sponsored annual conference is going to be in Tempe, Arizona from June 5th to June 8th. If you want more information, you'll find it at www.cirsx.com. If you want to sign up, that's the place to go. Now, that's a lot that I presented for the medicine part. Let's talk about miracles. On June 18th of 2002, I was awoken early in the morning by a phone call from my sister. And she told me that my mother had died overnight. She'd been sick for about 30 years. This wasn't terribly unexpected. I had actually been planning to go to California and see her. She lived, just outside, 80 miles outside of San Francisco. And I had tried to make a trip there and it didn't work. And then she died. Now, my mom and my dad had donated their bodies to science. They were going to be cadavers for medical students. And so we weren't going to have a service right away. And I offered to come to California right away. And she said, no, we'll have a service in about 3 months. And why was that important? Because at the time, I wasn't in New Mexico. I was actually in Lahaina, Maui, in the Hawaiian Islands. And I was celebrating my 15-year wedding anniversary, which was a couple of days later, with my first wife. And we were just celebrating and we were trying to work out some things in our marriage. And at that time, we had a couple, an old friend of mine and his wife, who still lived in California, who had joined us, and we were going to spend a week together in Maui. And it was pretty wonderful, to be honest with you. But my mom dying wasn't great. Anyway, on that particular day, we had decided that we were going to drive the infamous, the road to Hana. That's Hana. And so we're in the western part of the state, and when you drive all the way around to the southeastern part of Maui, I said the state, I meant the island, and they have some amazing things there. They have a beach that has just black pebbles. It's supposedly super beautiful. But we decided we're going to do that day. Now, the road to Hana is 54 miles long, and it takes at least 3 hours to get there. So why do you average 18 miles an hour? Because the road is super twisty and windy, and it's a difficult road. And historically, I was someone who got really, really carsick, even when in my early childhood. And this trip was no different. Even though I was driving, which is usually sufficient, this twisty, turning road just caused me to get intensely nauseated. I was perspiring. I had a headache. I felt horrible. And our 3-hour drive had already lasted 4 hours, and the people in the car were not happy. because I was driving so slowly because the twisty turny roads were just making me sick. So we stopped a few miles short of Hana. There was a nature park there, lots of beautiful flowers and everything. And my wife and my friend and his wife, the three of them, they went into the park. I just stayed in the car with the doors open, trying to not be nauseated. I mean, it was really bad. They came back about 45 minutes, and my friend's wife had slipped on a rock, on a wet rock, and had fallen and hit her head. And she had gashed her head open, and it was gushing blood. And my friend insisted that he was going to drive the rest of the way. And so I moved to the back seat. I mean, what can I say? I mean, she's bleeding. So, and those of you who have had car sickness, you know that the worst place for you to be is in the back seat. But I sacrificed for the team. So my friend started driving herky-jerky. That's the term that my wife used. He would come into a hairpin turn, like going 35 miles an hour. He'd slam on the brakes and whip the car around. And we go through this 15-mile-an-hour curve, and then he would whip coming out, and he'd accelerate and get back up to 35 miles an hour. And about 100, 150 yards later, he'd have to slam on the brake. Now, needless to say, you can expect that kind of driving is not good for people who have car sick. And I've been getting car sick for, at that point, like 40 years of my life. And I had never once thrown up. There were a couple times we had to pull over. I had to breathe some cool air, passing by. Wind is really nice, but I had never thrown up. But this one was different. He was just driving herky-jerky and became so violently nauseated, I just begged them to pull the car over. I opened the door and just started throwing up. And it took me a few minutes to stop and clean myself up a little bit. And then we got back in the car and we drove again. And interestingly enough, we were like 100 feet or 100 yards maybe from the urgent care clinic. So we stopped there to get her head sewn up. It took about 2 hours. And during that time, it started to get dark. And so now we're driving to Hana. We go the last final mile or two, and it's dark in the city. And the city closes at dark. There's nothing to do. There's one place that's open for dinner. We went to that place. There are no hotels that have any or any vacancies. So guess what? We're driving back 3+ hours, herky-jerky, after dinner. During dinner, my friend just kept reminding me, he said, I'm driving back. You are not going to drive back. We're not going to take 5 hours to get there. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm so nauseated. I can't even eat dinner. I ate no dinner. And I'm just so nauseated. And I'm thinking, how am I going to survive 3 hours of this driving back? And I felt like I was trapped, like I had no resources. I had no real vote in what was going to happen. And so I did what many of us do when we feel like we're trapped. I cried out to God. I didn't do it out loud. I did it quietly while they're enjoying their steaks and baked potatoes and I'm just sipping water. I just cried out to God and said, I can't tolerate 3 hours of going back. And the truth is, I probably could have, but it may have been every 15 or 20 minutes I'm pulling over to curl up. I would have gotten through it. It wasn't going to last me a lifetime, but I was just so dreaded. I was so terrified about the idea. It was debilitating, the idea of driving back. And God healed me. I felt it at the dinner table. The nausea went away. The headache went away. They were completely gone. He had healed me. Glory to God. There's nothing that I could have done to change that, but he did. And so we ended up driving back the 3 hours. I sat in the front seat, but my friend drove herky-jerky the entire 3 hours. I didn't get sick even once. And it's been 22 years since then, and I've never gotten car sick ever again. Glory to God. Thank you for healing me that night. Now, in every episode of Medicine and Miracles, we strive to bring you a moment of hope, an uplifting thought for your day. In my Hawaii story, I was desperate. And even though this is basically an acute illness, it's not going to last beyond a couple hours after we got back to the hotel room. I would survive the 3-hour trip. Just the thought of going through that 3 hours was terrifying. And God was so gracious that he healed me of the car sickness that night. He is so good. And that reminds of a verse in Isaiah chapter 54. It says, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. It doesn't say that there will be no weapons that are formed against me. It says that no weapon formed against me will prosper. So even though the trials and the tribulations come, I know that they will never overcome me. That verse says that the weapons will not overcome me. They will not overtake me. They will not take my life, and they will not divert me from the destiny that I was created to achieve. And the designer of these adversities is known to kill and to steal and to destroy. That's the purpose of the weapons. But I know that those weapons will not prosper me. They will not kill me. They will not steal from me. They will not destroy me, even though they are designed to do just that. These weapons will not prosper, and I will overcome every tribulation by God's grace. Woo! That's uplifting to me. I hope it is for you. Because remember, what God does for me and has done for me, he will do for you too. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. If you liked what you saw, if you learned something new, press like and subscribe. And join us again for our next episode of Medicine and Miracles, where we find the mysteries of the human body intersecting with the unsearchable God. Thank you so much. God bless you. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.